Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I promised we were going to talk about pathways to architecture, and we're going to do that. And I'm excited because today I have the wonderful husband and wife team of Scott Whitebone and Kyra Tyler. Kyra, as you know, because you guys have seen her before, is my colleague here at College Coach. She's also a former admissions officer at Brandeis, and her husband, Scott, is an architect. So yay, it's the perfect combo. Welcome, you two.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Beth.
Absolutely. All right, Kyra, we're going to start with you because what I want to start with is the kinds of things students can and should be thinking about in high school to prepare for applying to college to study architecture. So any specific coursework they should be thinking about, activities that they should be doing, or interests that they should be developing?
Yes. Yeah. So we do want students to cover like the standard kind of 5 cores, right? English, math, history, science, a language. I would say that if there's room for electives, it makes sense to probably put an art in there, or if there's some sort of intro to architecture, or even CAD. My husband can elaborate more on that if he wants, but that any of those kind of classes would be great. Even like a project lead the way, which is sort of prep for engineering, could be helpful, I think. But definitely like got to take physics, I would say. And if you can get to calculus, that would be really, really helpful. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago. Like, do you use calculus? Like, I don't think you use it as a practical skill, but I do believe that it's great preparation to be able to handle some of the workload that comes a little bit later. From an activity perspective, particularly if you believe that you may be applying to programs that have a portfolio, you should have some decent drawing skills. Or it could be painting, could be even photography. If you've been in an activity or a course that allows you to put together like a model, you could take some pictures of that. But I think we do need to see sort of that other kind of artistic side as well. So I find that those things are super duper helpful.
Got anything you would add on to what Kyra's saying?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what she said. I think having taking electives that would sort of that will allow you to have a portfolio created. So art classes, photography, as Kyra mentioned, I think are really helpful. And I think sort of catering your experience to the school, the type of school you want to go to, is really helpful. So understanding where you want to go. If you're going to SciArc is very different than going to Wentworth, which is where I went to school. And so if you understand the type of program you want to get into, then you can start to steer yourself towards the electives or activities that make sense for getting into that program.
Got it. All right. Well, then actually it's a perfect segue into my question for you, Kyra, which is, how do you decide what kind of architecture program you want to apply to, and what are the options? Because I think for many people, they're not even aware that there are options.
Yeah. So the first big thing is that to become a licensed architect, with perhaps may come up a little bit later in more detail what that means. But if you want to work as an architect in the field, you need to have a Bachelor of Architecture, or you need to have down the road a Master's of Architecture. You have to have some sort of professional degree within that. And so a B-Arch is 5 years. So number one, you have to be looking at schools that only have the B-Arch. If that's what you want to do coming out of college. Not every school has that. Very few actually have that. So that's the number one. That's the biggest driver, I would say. And that's going to be, it's akin, so I was a music major in college. This is a little bit more labor intensive than if you were just going even for business or art history or something, because you not only need to make sure that the major is there, but then to Scott's point, sort of about figuring out what kind of program, you have to do the research about the school. Are they really into sustainability? Are they really into big industrial design? Are they really like what is sort of their sweet spot around their education? And so I would say like absolutely lean into online tours. If you can get on campus and see the workspace, I think that's really interesting. See what's around, see what kind of projects are posted, see where kids are getting internships. That'll give you a good sense, I think, of where kids are going after. But this isn't something that I think is just to be Googled and sort of done. Like you need to actually get in the spaces and try to understand what the curriculum entails. I will also say It is 5 years. It usually involves a study abroad as part of that as well, plus co-ops. So this is a very different educational experience than, most people will be taking on.
And Kyra, one last question, and then Scott, I'd love to find out more about your specific pathway to architecture. But what if you're the parent of a student or a student who's saying, architecture is kind of seems cool, it sounds interesting, but they are nowhere near the point of kind of putting in all of that time and work right now, or it's too late. They haven't put that time and work in, and now they're going to be applying for it, or now they're applying to college. Right now, it's only May of their junior year, theoretically, but if you're listening to this and you're already a senior later on, are there options for those students who kind of want to explore architecture but aren't ready for a 5-year BArch program?
For sure. I would say like architectural history, which is available at some schools, that's going to be a 4-year program. I think that's good. That's a good start. You could do art history. I think that's interesting. You could do a type of engineering like civil would be great. So those are other things that you can put in your toolbox. And I would utilize summer probably to get internships at an architecture firm, even better if it's a full firm that also maybe has architecture, interior design, and also engineering, so you can see how all of those things play together. Because maybe you decide, I'm cool with my civil engineering degree, I don't want to get an MArch, right? So there are definitely ways that you can sort of supplement that. And then if you're like, I'm still all in, I still really love it, and I'm sitting here with this BA in art history, then you'll want to go ahead and look at Masters of Architecture programs, which will then allow you to get the proper credentials to work as an architect.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
So Scott, can you tell us a little bit more about your education and professional background, kind of how'd you become or come to this point in your career where you're now working as an architect?
Sure. So I went to Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. It's, as Kyra mentioned, it's a Bachelor of Architecture, 5-year degree. That was what I wanted to do because I didn't want to be forced into getting a master's degree, and which is for me important because in order to become a registered architect, you have to go to an accredited program. So it's a professional degree, but it's just to add to what Kyra said before, it actually has to be accredited, and sometimes accreditations go in and out. So it's always important to check before you go in that it actually is a program that will allow you to become a registered architect in the future. So I went to Wentworth, got a 5-year degree. I worked in Boston for several years at a small firm, deliberately sort of working in a small firm to get a lot of hands-on experience in commercial architecture. Moved to New York, did interior design, corporate interiors for a period of time. And now I'm in Chicago and worked at a few firms, SOM and now HED, doing large scale projects. And that's sort of been my path. My new role is a technical strategist. There's a lot of pathways, as Kyra sort of alluded to, you can pick in the realm of architecture. You could be much more design focused, much more technical. I, over time, sort of lean towards more technical. So I have a new role as technical strategist, and essentially sort of ensuring the overall success and mentorship of architects at our firm.
Awesome. I mean, it's always cool to hear that because when I think of architect, I think of someone basically sitting at a drafting table and creating things. And so it's always cool to hear the other roles that are involved in architecture. So that's cool to hear about your specific role. I'm curious, what was the BArch experience like? What's it like to be being in an architecture studio? For those students who are thinking, I think I might want to do this, it'd be great to give them that exposure.
It was challenging. To be honest, it was the first few years for me were a little more generalist. So we focused a lot on math, English, the sort of the core experience, and there was about 250 architects in our sort of initial program. At our 3rd year, we all sort of applied to the Bachelor of Architecture program, and about 40 to 50 people got in. So it was definitely whittled down. And at that point, we went into a studio environment. And so some of your classes were still in a traditional classroom environment, but most of them were literally in a studio where you're learning about design, or you're working on drawings, you have a big desk, the sort of what you picture when you think of architecture. It was, that was once we moved into our third year and moved into studio, that was the first time I had really struggled with getting A's, sort of, in a way. I mean, that was something I had to learn what it meant to be an architect.
Yeah.
I had to learn what it meant to design. And it's something you don't really learn sort of intrinsically in high school necessarily, unless you sort of get that experience. What good design means. I had learned math, I had learned English, I knew how to draw really well, but translate that in design for me took time to figure out. It was very rewarding because by my fifth year, I eventually got good at it and I sort of started to understand what it meant. But their job in school is to sort of train you how to figure out what design really means, not just sort of saying a home is going to be 4 walls and a roof, but
Right.
figuring out what that can actually be.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And actually, I was struck by something that you said, which is that you started with about 250 people and only like 30 or 40 or 40 or 50 made it. So did you know that going in? And is that common for B-Arch programs, that there is a whittling out process?
Yeah, I did know that going in, that there would be a weeding out program. So we really you had to focus on your grades. You had to have a certain GPA to move forward, but you also had to have a good portfolio. So in a way, there's an objective and subjective part there. So if you didn't have a good portfolio, but you had really good grades, you were not going to move forward. Mm-hmm. So it's something you had to be thinking about as a freshman, like making sure that you were sort of staying on track, because you knew by your third year, you'd have to make a decision. Do I go into a fourth year? Do I change schools? Do I stay in architecture?
Right.
What does this look like for me? And a lot of, most of the students obviously moved into other fields, and that's great. Some of them probably moved on to get masters afterwards, so they could eventually become a registered architect. That's really, but for me, getting the 5-year degree sort of made sense. But what I would say very challenging, and I particularly sort of figuring out what it means and what design means. Got
it. Okay, that's super helpful. And something else I think to factor in, and questions for students to ask when you're looking at a B-Arch program: once I'm in, am I in, or am I in and then in 2 more years I have to do something, clear a couple more hurdles before I'm truly in? So I think that's interesting.
Beth, I think,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say quickly that one thing for high schoolers and families to know is that you can't really transfer into an architecture program. Like, you can't really get into a B-Arch because it kind of starts, as Scott said, right from the start and right from the beginning of your tenure. And so it is tricky, because it's like, Scott and I had very similar educational experiences where I didn't go to a conservatory, but I received a conservatory-like education. Same thing with him. And that's sort of what happens when you're being trained on a particular skill set, right? So that's just sort of something to keep in the back of your mind, that I'm always like, if you think you want to do it, you should do it. Because otherwise, you're gonna, if you come to it later, which is fine, you're gonna have to back into it with another degree.
Right. That makes sense. All right, we're down to our last couple of minutes, but I of course have lots more questions for you, Scott. But I think a big question would be, for me, what if you find yourself and you're in this program, you're in a B-Arch program, and you decide you don't love it? What are any thoughts on related things that students could do? Because it does seem like this is one of those things where if you don't love it, you probably shouldn't do it.
Oh, I totally agree with that. There's a lot of sleepless nights, so you want to make it worth it. Yes. I think that's actually becoming very common. I mean, so I review a lot of resumes coming in, and what I'm seeing sort of a push towards is getting a master's degree with sort of a associated degree, and that could be a lot of sustainability, environmental sciences, building sciences. That's become really big. But I work with people with a degree in history. As long as they have an aptitude and they're getting their master's, which are, I think, around 3, possibly even 4 years now, depending on your previous degree, you can still come into a firm and be successful. But I would say that right now, what I'm seeing a lot of is sustainability, because there's a lot of adjacencies, and that's a big push in our industry right now.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Last question I think that I would have for you is around the process of becoming licensed. So that's, of course, a big step. You can graduate, get your degree and everything, but if you don't get licensed, you can't then work as an architect. So any insight into that process and how difficult or not that is, depending on your experience?
Sure. And I know we're running out of time. Essentially, when you get out of school with a accredited degree, you sign up to an organization called NCARB, the National Council of Registered Accredited Architects Board, and you essentially get an internship or somewhere. You will collect sort of hours that you will track, and it factors in it to about 3 years. No one does it in 3 years because you have to get a variety of experiences. And after that point, you take exams. Right now, there's a new sort of format, but it's 5 exams. Each one is about 4 or 5 hours. It is challenging, but the intent of the hours is to prepare you to be a good, well-rounded architect, and also to prepare you for those exams. Once you do that, then you become registered, and you become registered in one state. It's not a national license. So if you get a license, for me, I'm licensed in Illinois and a few other states.
Got it. Kind of like the bar then, right?
Yeah.
You're licensed to practice law in that state. So that's interesting.
The
Um,
internship is paid. I don't want people to think that you're working for free. The
that's right.
internship is it's a job, but so it's
Yeah.
paid. Yeah.
So
Yeah, the term is architectural intern, but you're right. It's on-the-job experience.
Got it. So in some ways, it's not dissimilar from, let's say, going into medicine, right? Where you do college and then you do medical school, although you can maybe skip that element if you do the BArch program, but then you're working and you're getting paid while you are becoming licensed. So that makes sense.
That's right.
Thank you.
And I would say I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish what you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say very similarly, then at that point, you start to then figure out what your specialty is.
Right. Yeah. So very similar in that perspective.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. And this was super helpful, not only to me, because I didn't know a whole lot, but also I'm sure to all of our listeners with an interest in this. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Beth.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take another short break. And when we get back, we are talking about pathways to education. So don't go away.